All right, so we're on.
All right, so we're on. Hi, welcome to the Sharia Anatomy Podcast.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'm Gareth Bryant. I'm Chaplain Gareth Bryant.
I'm James Ferguson.
Dr. James Ferguson, and this is Sharia's Anatomy.
Yeah, hi guys. So we're here to talk about bioethics from Islamic perspective, and that involves medical healthcare questions, that involve ethical decisions. And doctors don't always know the good answers from a secular perspective, so we turn to our chaplains and our Islamic scholars to help guide us in some of these difficult choices.
Which are very difficult. Yeah, there's no just, I tell people all the time, there's no such thing as an easy decision. There's only necessary decisions.
So for those of you who didn't see us before, Gareth is a chaplain since 2014, and I am a doctor in New York. Yeah. So just want to put out a disclaimer again, like last time. Neither of us are scholars.
Right.
None of us have an ijaza. Don't take what we say as a formal ruling. No formal fatwas.
We're just giving you facts and opinionated postures based on facts.
Yep.
Yeah, basically. That's it.
If ever comes up, just ask your local scholar.
Right. Or someone who you trust in general.
Okay. So let's talk about our first topic today.
Right.
Anatomical organ and blood donations.
Right.
So let's start with organs first.
Right.
As people get sicker, their organs start to fail, and to save life, you can get a donated organ. And this either can cure the patient if it's a certain kind of disease, or can let them live longer. That's the idea.
Right.
This can be a couple things: kidney transplant, liver transplant, pancreas transplant, heart, lung, intestine. The most common one in America is a kidney transplant.
Right. I think that's the most common one globally as well.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of diabetes, a lot of people just some kidney diseases. It's actually it's not that uncommon. I'd say there's about, in last year there were 36,000 organ transplants in the U.S.
That's a lot.
That is.
In legitimate hospitals or on the black market? That's a whole nother conversation.
In legitimate hospitals, that's just in the U.S. only.
Right.
So most organs that are donated come from deceased people. However, every year more and more people are getting them from a living donor.
Okay.
And the most common of all transplants and donations are blood transfusions.
Right.
And this is really, really common because we need about 36,000 units of blood every day in the U.S.
Right.
for ERs, for sick patients, cancer patients. And about 3% of people who are eligible in the U.S. donate every year.
Right.
So it's a very common thing.
So for the audience, give us a concise, actual medical definition of an anatomical donation. What does that actually mean from a medical definition perspective?
Okay, so there's a couple different kinds of organs you can get transplanted. Typically, like I said, they can come from another person, what they call an allograft or allotransplant, meaning from another person
who's actually alive,
who is alive or dead.
Okay.
So if someone has died, if they're recently dead, you can actually harvest their organs. A heart, for example, liver. These are the really high demand ones.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, for obvious reasons, organ harvesting is a very touchy, controversial topic. And with Allah's help, we'll get into the nature of organ harvesting. Right. So
it's almost always from humans, although there are cases when we get this from other sources. Like there are some that try and make artificially, but they're not doing it very good, and they're very, very new, like artificial valves and things. Mm. But often they also get transplants and donations from animals.
Right.
So before we had insulin from humans, we actually used to harvest it from pigs. Mm. That's one example.
Right.
Okay. Would you say insulin from a pig, would that be considered an anatomical donation?
I mean, yeah, realistically, but it wouldn't be anatomical from a human, obviously. It would be anatomical from a non-human source. Yeah. Right.
So I guess we should go to that.
Yeah. First. So basically, like what I had understood an anatomical donation to be is just basically anything that is given from one's person anatomically, whether it be skin graft, blood, whatever.
Yeah.
So is that like a safe general definition, or is it safe to assume that most people, when they think of both inside and outside the medical field in terms of anatomical donation, are they exclusively talking about organ donation?
It's not only. I think when people hear about a blood transfusion, that's like a different level in their mind,
right?
Because that's just something that's easier. You can donate blood in half an hour.
Right.
You know, while most of these other transplants and donations, you have to go to the hospital to get surgery, put you under
Right.
anesthesia, and take something out of you.
Right. Right.
So I guess we could start from there. So is, you know, from Islamic perspective, is anatomical donations, is it halal?
That's a good question. You're going to have a whole lot of varied opinions, which we'll go through. But just from the very general, holistic perspective, again, every podcast is based upon two amongst the maqasid, or the objectives of a Sharia, Islamic law.
Yeah.
And the two that are covered are pertaining to the preservation of morality, integrity, and also the preservation of life, meaning well-being, welfare. So in terms of morality, integrity, it means that ensuring that moral standards are maintained within human society, such as chastity, ethics, character, honesty, kindness, philanthropy, etc., and to abolish all of the opposites of the aforementioned.
Right.
This is also in terms of life, well-being, welfare, meaning maintaining the sacredness of life, health, etc., and educating people on how to care for themselves as well as others via respect for human life, health, etc. Now, this pertains to, in terms of anatomical donation,
Yeah.
holistically, anything that you sacrifice of yourself to give to another person, that's a selfless action.
Yeah.
Obviously, right. And Islamically, there's huge reward for being philanthropic, right? Philanthropic.
Yeah.
For being philanthropic, for being charitable, there are mass amounts of rewards, right? However, as in all cases Islamically, everything has to be based upon a tanzil, revelation.
Yeah.
Meaning that it has to be textually sound. It has to be based upon non-abrogated textual sources. Now, in terms of anatomical donation, there, especially pertaining to, let's say, for example, if you will yourself to have things taken from you
Yeah.
in death, right? Islamically, there's very strict rules about how to care for a person in death,
Yes.
right? So I'm going to go over the ikhtilaf, the religio-scholastic differing in categories regarding anatomical donations. So the first category, which is the most conservative, is that no kinds, types of anatomical donations under any circumstances. None. Like not even blood, skin graft, none. That's the most conservative opinion, is that absolutely no, even if the person is alive. Even if it's something that doesn't require a person to be dead to give.
Okay.
The most conservative opinion is that it's not allowed at all.
To give or to receive?
Both.
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 Okay.
Both. The second, which is not as conservative, only anatomical donations which can benefit fellow Muslims. Here's where it's going to be very controversial and tricky. So with this opinion, it basically means that only a Muslim can only receive anatomical donations, but cannot receive. I mean, they can only receive anatomical donations, but they cannot give anatomical donations. And again, like I said, that's very, very touchy, right? And then also with that, it means that if a person donates, like let's say for example, an organ or donates blood, this opinion also states that a Muslim is only allowed to give an organ or blood or skin graft or whatever, or bone marrow, what have you, to a fellow Muslim.
Oh, okay.
So this opinion, it allows it, but this opinion is exclusively from Muslim to Muslim, right? So again, like I said, that's very controversial for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And the reason for this is because, let's say, for example, if a person chooses to donate their body to science, right? Islamically, we are not allowed to do this at all.
I see.
Because we have what's called manasik al-janaza, the rites of al-janaza, the rites of Islamic burial, meaning it's the right of a Muslim to be committed to the ground, right? So if you donate your body to science, by definition, your rights are not going to be observed. They're not going to be respected and observed if you choose to will yourself to science.
I see.
Now, the scholars who take this position, they're of the persuasion and the posture that the reason why it's acceptable to receive anatomical donations from non-Muslims is because non-Muslims don't have these standards of things like al-janaza, things like that. That's why they take this posture that if it's the person is not Muslim, it doesn't matter whether they choose to donate their organs or their blood or their body to science, because they're not operating from the parameters of Islamic law anyway. But for Muslims who are operating within the parameters of Islamic law, this is not allowed. So that's why that type of position exists.
Okay.
The third position is that only anatomical donations which can benefit one's Muslim family relatives. So here, there's another religio restriction on it. So they allow for anatomical donation, but only in terms of if it's your Muslim relatives, right? So not even pertaining to just all Muslims, if it's only your Muslim relative.
I see.
Right? So then there's another opinion which states that anatomical donations can only be given when a person can still survive thereafter. Meaning, you can give an anatomical donation if it doesn't necessitate you not being alive. So that's another opinion. So what that also means, obviously, is that you're not allowed to will yourself to give anatomical donations in death.
Oh.
So that's what that means.
Okay.
Right.
So living only.
Living only. Yeah, that this position pertaining to, you can only give anatomical donations if it doesn't result in your death or post-death. Like, in other words, this position states that Islamically you're not allowed to will yourself to science or to will your organs or any piece or part of yourself in death after you die. And then the final position is that there's no religio restrictions at all if it's going to involve saving someone's life.
Okay.
Right? So that's where that is. Now, in terms of the first position, right? The first religio opinion, I only agree with the first opinion in terms of donating oneself to science. Because Islamically, we're not allowed to do that, because that causes you to not respect and observe the janazah rights, the Islamic burial rights of a fellow Muslim.
Right.
And then also in terms of in death, Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, and this narration is in Ibn Majah, there's two narrations, one from Abi Dawood and one from Ibn Majah, in which Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, even breaking the bone of one who is dead is like breaking it when he is alive. And then the narration Ibn Majah mentions that Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, breaking the bones of a dead person is just like breaking his bones when he is alive.
I see.
In terms of sin, right? So what that means is that if you allow someone to like dissect you, essentially, right? If you allow someone to dissect you, open you up, remove your organs, this is just like you doing it when the person's alive. This has two meanings.
Yeah.
One is that the soul actually feels this happening, because like our flesh doesn't feel anything. Like if you put your hand in a fire, your physical primal anatomical body doesn't feel the pain of the fire. Your soul feels the pain of the fire, right? So this is also why Islamically we're not allowed to cremate.
Right.
Because the soul actually feels the pain of the burning of the body.
Yeah.
And then the second reason is just in terms of the lack of respect for the human anatomy.
I see.
Which goes into what we mentioned about the morality, integrity being one of the maqasid, one of the objectives of Sharia, right? The preservation of morality, preservation of integrity. So Islamically, from an Islamic perspective, to just will yourself to science or to just will your organs away after death, to just have someone dissect your body like you're a science experiment, not only is your soul feeling the pain, your person is being disrespected.
I see.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
So that's why that's the most conservative opinion. That's why the most conservative religio opinion is that no anatomical donations at all. But with that conservative opinion, that pertains to death and life. Because you have people who say that even blood donation when you're alive is not allowable. So that's the most conservative religio opinion. I don't agree with that element in terms of you not allowing someone to donate while they're alive. I don't agree with that opinion.
Right. I think Orthodox Judaism is the same way. They don't
very
believe
similar, right?
The body. Well, their belief is the body has to be whole when it's buried, and you can't have anything missing.
I mean, that's a basic rule of thumb Islamically. Even prior to the revelation of the Quran, this is a staple, right? But in terms of just being able to contribute to someone's preservation of life, that's a noble action. Now, obviously, it has to be done within the parameters of al-Islam.
Right, right.
So in terms of all of the opinions, the opinion that I agree with the most is pertaining to donations can only be given if it doesn't cause a person to die. That's the opinion that I'd agree with the most.
Sure. I think most people would agree with that.
Right.
It's either super rare or almost impossible for you to have a donation where the person's going to die. Like, I mean, people talk about...
Especially depending on the type of donation. Like, typically, with Allah's help, you're not going to die if you donate blood or donate a skin graft or things like that.
And you can donate one kidney because you have another kidney left over.
Right, because realistically, you can live without one kidney. Right.
Right, and that's for the most part, everyone's okay with that.
Speaking of organs you can live without, is there such a thing as a spleen transplant?
That's a really good question. There's been talk about should we ever do one, because without a spleen, your immune system is weakened.
It's compromised.
It's compromised.
Even though realistically you can live without a spleen.
You can live without a spleen. It's just you can get sicker a lot easier.
Right. Because like the spleen is literally one of the bedrocks of your immunity.
Yeah.
Plus, it's responsible for the destruction of aged or retarded red blood cells.
Right, exactly. So the thing is, but that's a good question about spleen donations. There's been some research into it, but there's some drawbacks to it. It's no surgery is risk-free, so you're putting a risk already. And you can live without it. Do you really need it enough that you'd benefit from surgery?
Right.
The spleen, the reason people get spleens taken out is because if you get any kind of accident, it's very, very vascular. I mean, you can it's full of arteries, and if it gets cut or lacerated or slashed, it can bleed to death.
Your life is a serious danger.
Serious danger, and that's an emergency. Right. So putting it back in is difficult. Right. It requires a lot of small surgery to put it back in.
So basically, like the spleen basically has the most vasculature of any organ.
It's up there.
Right.
And so,
well, at least one of the most.
Yeah, it's kind of superficial. It's close to the surface. If you get a good punch in the belly in a good spot, you can rupture it.
Wow.
And that is dangerous and deadly.
So, like, let's say, for example, people who are like boxers or martial artists. So, is that a very easy injury to acquire, like a spleen injury?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've been a lot of boxers with spleen injuries. I actually don't know the answer to that part. But I do say this is a very frequent thing in car accidents and stuff like that.
Right.
Because
the only reason why I ask is because it's very common for boxers to get like bruised ribs or broken ribs, things like that. And like you said, since the spleen is so close to like the abdominal region,
right?
And so, like you said, it's more superficial than most organs. That's why I was asking whether or not spleen injuries would be like very common in terms of like fighting or MMA, UFC, things like that.
It does happen because it's right by the lowest rib. So if you break that rib, it can actually move down and slice your spleen. It has happened.
Wait, you mean the rib above the floating ribs?
It's right. You're gonna put me on the spot here. It's been a while. So it's in your left upper quadrant,
right?
Sort of on the side over there. So it's not easy to feel it for the most part unless it's like unusually swollen,
right?
So it's really hard for you to feel your own spleen,
right?
But it's in that spot where it's sort of the floating ribs are more towards the back,
right?
But like your lower anterior front ribs over here.
Okay.
If that one does break, then it can move and slice it. The same with your liver on the other side,
right? Okay.
And so if people who wear your seatbelts, folks, because if you don't wear a seatbelt, you could break one of these.
Right.
And people do die from them.
Okay, so basically, like anatomically, your spleen is kind of like on the exact opposite as your liver.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Relatively.
Yeah,
I mean, your liver's pretty big, and your spleen's the size of like a baseball or smaller.
Right.
So it's not as big.
Cool. Yeah. So just bringing it back full circle.
Yeah.
So that's why I take that position. Is that I take the position that you're allowed to use or like donate organs or donate blood or what have you, with the condition that you're actually alive and that it's not something that results or necessitates you dying.
Sure. This isn't like John Q, where Denzel says, "I'm going to kill myself and my son's going to get the organs," or 8 pounds.
You know, since you mentioned that, 8 pounds is a little different because with Will Smith's character, he made those anatomical donations as his way of like making a tauba or repentance or like seeking absolution for things that he felt or actually did do, right?
Sure.
But in terms of the John Q thing, is actually based on something that happens in real life in terms of xenophobic discrimination, in terms of who is selected or who is not selected for organ transplants and those type of things. So John Q was like a small Hollywood window into what happens in real life. because we know based on ethnocentric conditions or
Yeah.
impositions, I should say,
Yeah.
ethnocentric, xenophobic impositions, access to great health care, medical care based on affluence and wealth. Certain people are muscled out.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So
So,
the
yeah.
movie John Q was based on those things.
So that brings us up to our next topic, actually. So
Right.
I just want to pause it for a second because donating your body to science is a very different topic. We'll go talk about another future episode, I
Right.
think, because there's a lot to get through on that.
It's a lot
one.
to get through.
But just to go for this one, you're right. So the problem is, in reality, there's not enough organs to go around. There's not enough. There's a lot of people who are on the transplant waiting list who need a transplant, a kidney transplant waiting list, a lung transplant, and there's not enough organs available to donate. So now the problem is you have rationing. That's the actual system we have right now is rationing. And the question, like you said, is who gets priority?
Right.
So this is where it becomes a bit of a policy discussion because in the U.S. It's illegal to sell organs. It's
Even though
illegal-
we know for a fact that it's done.
it's done,
It's
but
done.
it's illegal to openly buy or sell organs.
Officially. Like on the books. Right.
On the books. Now, this is a big topic when it came up because of how do we do this? And the politicians were like, no, Americans are very generous. We're we're generous people. We'll volunteer our organs. We'll encourage that. And so a lot of countries, the US, Canada, UK, Denmark, Australia, they all have this altruistic, donate your own. We'll encourage you to put commercials on TV, get yourself tested, put yourself on donate your marrow.
The cornea, donations. Like as a matter of fact, there's a famous actor who he was on Law and Order. He donated his corneas. He willed his corneas to be donated after death.
Yes.
Those type of things.
So that's right. There were billboards up in New York City. Jerry Orbach, the actor,
Right, Jerry Orbach, right.
donated his eyes, and someone else
Right.
can see because of him.
Right.
So they're trying to say, for ethics reasons, we can't force you to donate, but we'd love to encourage you to.
Right. But see, here's the thing too. The catch-22 is there's actually I found this out recently. There's certain states. Like I found out, someone was telling me that I can't confirm this. That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Someone said that if you are in Atlanta or if you're in Georgia and you just drop dead in the street, your body is automatically considered property of the state.
Ooh.
Somebody was telling me this. I wanted clarification and confirmation about
That's a great
That's
question.
a serious thing.
So in a lot of countries, that's the case. In the U.S., unless this is like a homeless person who they cannot identify, typically you and I, like if you and I drop dead right now, you have your ID.
May Allah
on
forbid,
you-
number one.
Allah forbid. If you died right now, your body is your property. They cannot take your organs without your express permission, which is why they say, can you put a donor card in your pocket so you can wish to donate a living will,
Right.
or put yourself on the organ donor registry so at least we have like you signature before in advance that yes, I can do that.
Right.
As I understand it, maybe Atlanta, that may be doing it for homeless people or people who are like John Does who have no idea who this person is.
Right.
Possibly you can do that because from a legal standpoint, your body is property.
Right.
And so your body is the property of your estate. So
Right.
your will says what happens to your property,
Right.
including your own body.
Right. Right.
There's exceptions for like if you die and they get your mother or your sister or your wife
Like
on the phone.
next of kin type of thing.
Next of kin, they can because of there's a time limit on this. They will.
What is the time limit, by the way?
That's a really good question. So it depends on
Is
the
it within
organ.
72 hours generally?
Depends on the organ. Most of them are within 72 hours. Actually, some of them are a little sooner than that because the problem is once you die, the oxygen stops moving to your organs and they start to
Things start to decompose. very
decompose.
quickly.
It's the easiest answer. Yeah,
Right.
things like the heart and kidneys, the sooner the better. Like their ideal situation is if you're in a coma and you're brain dead because your heart's still pumping, but you're legally dead.
Right.
So
right.
that would be the perfect opportunity. 'cause
But
they
see,
can
that's
take
another
that.
thing too. We were
Yeah.
talking about last week. What's the difference between Islamically dead and being clinically dead? Because we know Islamically, just because someone is declared clinically dead, that doesn't mean that their soul is out of their body finally. It doesn't mean that. A person can be declared clinically dead but still be Islamically alive, and vice versa. A person could be Islamically dead but still be on life support.
Right.
So we really don't know.
And that's a tough
That's
question.
a tough question. Yeah.
So to answer your question, most organs as soon as possible. If you were like hit by a car and you run to the ambulance right now into the ER
Right.
and you're dead and you're warm and dead, then they can say we'll do this right away. Certain things like what do you call like your corneas.
Right.
Those don't have a lot. Those are on your eyes. There's not a lot of arteries there. Those
Right.
can actually be transplanted days later.
Okay, all right.
But that's sort of
and
rare.
like for lack of a better term, like the shelf life is a lot longer on a cornea as opposed to a heart or a kidney.
Definitely.
Right. But also, let's say, for example, because me personally, I personally advocate for this. I advocate for people to not check the box on your ID on donation cards, because once you do that, you inherently make your body property of the state.
Right.
Which means legally, secularly, they can do whatever the hell they want with your body. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And especially coming from an Islamic perspective, being Muslim first,
Yeah.
it would be wrong for me to advocate the opposite. It would be wrong for me to advocate for people or encourage people to check that anatomical donation box. Now, if a person makes a personal choice
Yes.
and puts it in their separate will, their wasiyah, their will, okay, after death, I would like X, Y, and Z to be donated, then that's between them and Allah, and Allah will judge them accordingly.
Right.
But for you to just check that box, realistically, they can use your entire body based on the checking of that box. Because
Absolutely.
the check on that box, it is no restriction as to how your body is allowed to be used as an anatomical donation.
Right.
But once you check that box, realistically, your entire person can be used for whatever.
Pretty
and that's
much.
very, very dangerous.
Oh yeah, you can, because the problem is you have no idea how you're going to die for the most part.
Right.
So people say I'll donate everything.
Right.
If I fall in the concrete and hit my head, you can donate my heart.
Right.
You have no idea. Or if you were like really badly mangled up and they can't use that, but they can use other parts of your body, it's different.
Right. And then also, what about this? The whole, even the whole issue about this like registry.
Right.
Who has access to this registry?
That's a good question.
Because there have been cases of people dying, and ironically, they were on this donation registry. So this brings up a lot of suspicion, rightfully so, about is there this conspiracy to kill people who are on these donation registries?
Right.
That brings up a lot of valid suspicion.
Sure, and it's very common to have that kind of suspicion because people don't want to talk. It's a lack of trust. Because for one thing, you're sort of trusting that a stranger. Usually, relatives can donate blood and organs,
Right.
but usually it's a stranger who gives it to you.
Usually, typically.
Typically, for the more often than not. So then you're kind of trusting someone else's good intentions.
Right.
And do you have that? And also, there are people that are worried if I have the donor card, if I say yes to that, and it's on my driver's license, it's on your license now.
Right.
And the ambulance shows up, they go, oh, he's a donor, and they're going to treat you less.
Yeah.
There's a fear of this.
Exactly. And there's also a fear that, let's say, for example, may Allah forbid, you're in a really bad accident or you get shot or whatever,
Yeah.
and you're in the hospital, you're
Yeah.
getting worked on, but if they check your ID and it's checked, what's the probability that they'll let you die just so they can organ harvest?
Yeah.
That's a valid concern. for people.
Yeah. That's a really good question. So just to answer that, because I was a former EMT, worked in an ambulance, and I worked in an ICU. They, as far as I know, it's a popular worry, but I don't think it's actually true. The ER
Well,
staff,
not officially anyway.
It's not officially.
Right.
The ER staff, when they're working on you, they don't notice this. This is something that if someone is actually dead, then they have someone comes in and looks through the record or gets the registry information. Or if you're in a coma or you're actually brain dead, then they're going to call the transplant team at the hospital and they look up your information.
Right.
Are you a donor? Yes
Right.
or no? Let's get someone on the phone. Let's get a relative.
Right.
If your wife's on the phone, can we say yes over the phone? And that's something that happens after the fact.
Since you mentioned that, since you mentioned that, let's say, for example, a person does check yes on their donor card.
Yeah.
If they contact next of kin, is there a way that a person who is let's say, for example, power of attorney, is there a way for them to override the provisions that we know are established as a result of someone checking yes on their ID for anatomical donation?
That's a really good question. And so not enough people give permission after death, right? So families in the U.S. do not have a legal standing to veto the sign request. If you have a sign request, it's like a DNR. If the family doesn't agree with it, they don't have legal right to override it. However, in practice, in the hospital, the family is their arms folded, you're not touching him, they might just let it slide.
On a scale of 0 to 10, how often is that actually respected? What you just, that scenario you just mentioned of the family being hardline and not giving in on a scale of 0 to 10.
So I never actually had a patient who had that situation.
Right.
But from what I hear from other doctors, almost always the family wins out.
Okay.
And that's not legally supposed to happen that way. Like,
So like on a scale of 0 to 10 is like a 9.
it's like a 9.
Okay.
Legally, you could say, no, here's his signed papers. He said donate the organs, and we can call security to get you thrown out.
Oh wow.
It's, as far as I know, I've never heard of that happen. They're usually like, okay, if they say no, they say no. We're not going to cause a scene. We're not going to cause a ruckus. We don't want to get sued. We don't want to be in the New York Post the next day.
But even with that, let's say for example, if a person is in the morgue, right? What's the human guarantee that the person won't get dissected in the morgue, or their organs won't get taken out in the morgue or anything, or in the process of what's the guarantee?
That's a good question, because there have been in the news
And
real
this is
cases
documented,
yeah, where someone did say, so I donated my eyes, and then at the funeral, hey, why are there scars on the body?
Right.
Oh, because they donated organs. Now it's pretty uncommon. But it does happen. When it does happen, it's in the news a lot.
Right.
It's like a big story in the news because I think everyone's a little repulsed by hearing that kind of story.
Of course,
So
because it's a violation. Of
course it's a violation.
It's a violation of one's humanity.
Yeah.
Right. And this is actually why, from an Islamic perspective, the reason why that most conservative opinion exists, because as a preventative measure
Yes.
for those type of things.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So
And to add to that, a lot of people also believe that only the rich get transplants, so why should I donate my organs? If I'm poor, I can't get it.
Right.
Like the John Q kind of story.
right, which is based on fact, which is based
Very
on real
fact.
things. Yeah.
Actual fact. Oh, yes. And that's a real problem. So kind of the question is, so the government and healthcare bodies try to say, how can we fix this? Well, we have to ration things out. There's not enough to go around. So is it first come, first served? Should we prioritize it by age? Should children get
Or by medical condition.
by medical condition? If they have a job, can they pay? Now, there are cynical people who say, if you have the ability to pay, then they should get priority, like the John Q situation, because the hospital says, look, the president of the hospital is like, my duty is to keep the hospital open. So
it becomes a dollar and cents issue.
It can, and that's a question. Like in the long run, like, are you going to help anyone if the hospital closes? So it's a tough situation.
But then it goes back to the provisions of the Hippocratic Oath.
Oh yeah.
So it seems very evident that people are willing to cut corners in terms of the respect and the observation of the Hippocratic Oath.
Well, that's where it gets tough, because then there's a conflict between the doctor, like, you're my patient, I'm going to advocate for you,
Right.
and the hospital administration,
Who's paying the doctor?
who's paying
Right.
who's paying the system,
Right.
And there is a bit of a gap there.
Right.
So we try to find ways. What actually works out in the end is something called a transplant committee, where the doctor says, this patient, their liver is failing, they have probably 3 months left to live,
Right.
they need a transplant right now.
And they also work in conjunction very tightly with the ethics committees.
Correct. Because ethics is intertwined in every single part of this.
Because almost every single time transplant or organ donation is brought up, ethics committee is right behind it.
And the committee is there because there's questions, okay, is this person, do they need it? Are they eligible? Should we put them high or low on the list? Because there's a waiting list. They
Right.
make a long list of priority.
Right.
And there's certain things that can put you high up on the list, like if you're very young, you're a child,
Right.
or you were in an accident,
Right.
or like you have a very short amount of time to live.
Right.
They'll put you high up on the list. But however, if you have other things, okay, you're probably lower risk, or you may need a transplant in 10 years, like a kidney transplant, but we can wait because you're on dialysis right now. You've got
Right.
10 years of waiting time. Then they'll put you lower on the list.
Speaking of dialysis, specifically, but also in general, people who are substance abusers.
That's my next point.
Yeah,
Because-
I know I don't know a person, but I visited a person when I was doing my chaplaincy residency in Far Rockaway. She was a dialysis patient, outpatient, and she had mentioned to me that she was on a kidney transplant list.
Yeah.
However, her son stepped up to the plate and said, I want to donate a kidney to my mother. They refused to allow her son to donate to her because of her substance abuse history,
Oh, wow.
because of her substance abuse track record. They literally refused her son to donate his kidney to her.
So wow, even inside the family, that's a surprise to me. Now, to take to the next point, because if you're a substance abuser, here's the problem: if I give you an organ, are you going to live, or are you going to just die right away? Because
or are you going to relapse and start using
exactly
all of those factors,
so
right?
Liver,
and that's a very messed up space and place to be in.
oh yeah, thousands of people die every year from liver failure, and majority of that, I think, is alcohol abuse.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely.
Alcoholism, for sure. Yeah.
Definitely. So the problem is, would they transplant you if you are still drinking?
Right.
If you're still using alcohol, no.
Right.
They will be like, you will break the next liver, and then someone else who deserved it won't get it.
Right.
So as a policy, you have to be sober, and you have to show that you're sober and sober for a period of time.
Right.
And the committee will have to meet and say, is he at risk of relapsing? And this is for kidneys, liver.
But even that is
everything.
very relative as well, because I've heard stories of one of my chaplain peers who I did chaplaincy training with.
Yeah.
He mentioned that he knew someone who was clean for 26 years and then they fell off the wagon. And he asked him, he said, what made you fall off the wagon? What happened? He said, I stopped counting the days.
Oh.
I was like, wow.
Damn.
That's it. But like you said, how do you gauge that? How do you measure that? Because you can have someone who's clean for 30 years
Yeah.
and then they fall off the wagon.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's a very touch and go, very touchy.
touch and go.
It
There was
very
a
touchy
big
situation.
article in New York Times front page last year about people who do IV drugs, and you can get bad infections from IV drug use.
Of course.
And you can get heart infections.
That's one of the easiest ways that HIV was spread.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Yeah.
But it also can cause heart infections on the heart. It's called endocarditis, where your valves get infections, and now your valves stop working because they scar over.
Right.
And now you need a valve transplant.
Because
Or
what happened with that is
transplant.
like it's almost like your heart is flooded with blood and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah,
Right.
it's getting backed up. It's not pumping correctly.
Right.
And so you get heart failure.
So it's like your heart is drowning basically
Pretty
in its
much.
own blood. Right.
That's one of the ways. Yeah.
Right.
So now there's a question. Well, doctors don't want to transplant those patients because they say they're probably going to relapse. There's a high in reality. There's a high relapse rate among drugs in general.
Period. Right.
Period. Which is why they're always afraid of this, because are you one of the low numbers or one of the high numbers? Are you going to actually be clean and sober, or in 10 years are you going to relapse and we'll waste the whole thing?
Right.
And that's a tough question. So that's a whole committee has to have this actual vote.
Yeah.
And it's a life and death decision.
Literally, yeah.
Literally. I remember, what was that, 12 years ago, was a whole talk about, is the government going to create something called death panels, where you have to go in front of the board and say, deserve to live for these reasons. That actually transplant
Well,
panels,
inherently, that's kind of sort of what ethics committees decide.
Yeah.
To a large extent, ethics committees do decide who lives and who dies.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to things like organ donation and organ transplant, those type of things.
Yeah. I don't want that.
That's
on
a
me.
huge burden.
It's a huge burden.
Just like what we were talking about last week
Yeah.
in terms of like death with dignity. Like, are you that brave or that foolish enough to
Oh, yeah.
decide who gets to live, who gets to die, and you have to meet a law with that. Right.
Huge burden. Which is why they say a committee. A committee, they spread it out. That way, I can sleep at night knowing that 10 other people had the same decision as me.
Right.
It's just
You don't want to be guilty by yourself.
Oh, nobody wants to be guilty by themselves. If
That's
it's always
true.
something where who's going to get blamed, they spread it out.
Yeah, I mean, you know what they say. JFK mentioned a famous statement: "Victory has 100 fathers, and defeat is an orphan." So something like this would be a defeat, and no one wants to claim it.
Oh, sure. Nobody
Yeah.
wants their name on that paper. Sorry, you're
right.
not getting your organs.
Signed by so and so and so and so. Right.
Nobody wants that.
Right,
It's
right.
always like the committee, the big insurance company,
Right.
the department of the hospital.
Right.
Never a single person.
Right. Exactly.
Nobody wants their name on that. No one
Yeah.
wants the news camera on their doorstep.
No one wants to be interviewed for that.
Well, because I remember, it's like 15, 20 years ago, this guy was denied an organ transplant by his insurance. They wouldn't pay for it.
Ooh.
They refused.
That's nasty.
They were giving some silly excuse where it's maybe an experiment, or it's not, the odds aren't great, so we're not going to bother.
So all in all, it was just a lame excuse.
So it was a lame excuse. So what happened was Michael Moore. He had his own TV show back in the day, and he had the guy.
I remember that show.
The
I
Awful
forgot
Truth, yes.
Yeah.
So he had a funeral for the guy. The guy's alive. They had it on the doorstep of the CEO of the
They
insurance
faked
company.
his death,
Not even fake his death. They had a funeral.
like a mock funeral.
A coffin, and he's in the coffin, and the priest is reading the
Like,
funeral
yeah.
thing. and there's camera crews there, and the CEO's looking out the window. Oh my God!
Oh,
So
man.
they caved. They let the guy
Wow.
have have the operation
Wow, that's hardcore.
because
That's serious.
they were like, "This is his fault." CEO, Paul Allen, it's his fault.
Right. Wow.
So nobody wants that.
Yeah, that's serious. That's a serious burden. Yeah, but just in general, like anytime when you come to things like that, it's very touch and go.
Oh yeah.
You know?
So there's trying to find ways too, like how can we fix this? Because there's just a shortage. Now some countries have applies differently. Places like some countries like Israel, it's opt out, meaning if you die, your organs are donated unless you have in writing, no, I refused.
So that's like for anyone.
For anyone.
So it's just automatic. Your body is just donated.
Automatically.
Wow.
Now you have to, in writing, say, I refuse this and I don't want this.
Wow.
It's surprising because Israel's a very Orthodox community. They're very against this. Orthodox
Right.
community is against this, but Israel has a policy where it's opt out. In America, it's opt in. You have to say, I want to donate my organs.
Right.
If you
Yeah,
don't,
because in other words, like in the United States, the default
Yes.
is not your whole body is given to science.
Right,
But in
right.
Israel, the default is that your body is given to science.
default is, your organs are donated, not the whole body. As
I mean,
far as
well,
I know.
we know what happens,
But,
but things
yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it was a scandal actually
Right.
because this wasn't a very
Is this
public
sti-
policy.
Is this still on the books policy for Israel?
Yes, it
that you know?
is.
Wow.
There was a scandal a couple of years ago where there was a news article came out that said Israel is harvesting organs of dead Palestinians, and this was a true story. And the Israeli government angrily,
When you said that, that's literally the first thing that came to my mind anyway.
well, they angrily denounced that this is an attack. This is how dare you accuse us of this? And turned out it was actually accurate. And the response was, well, no, it's an opt-out policy, so we will take organs of anybody regardless. But they kind of were hiding this. It wasn't a very public policy because it didn't look good. People didn't like the thought of this. Americans don't like the thought of this. It's a
Right.
the idea is that, hopefully just donate whatever is necessary voluntarily.
Yeah, but
It
who
skips
gets
the
to
whole
gauge
issue.
that? That's another thing. Because what one entity deems as necessary, another entity may not necessarily deem as
Right.
necessary.
Yeah.
That's an extremely relative, open-ended
Sure.
concept of what's necessary.
So
'Cause
that's the problem.
Who gets
yeah.
to decide what's necessary and what's not?
That's where it gets tough. No one
Yeah.
wants a decision, and like I said, people don't trust the government. They don't trust the hospitals because everyone's got a stake in this.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Because like you said, it's a $1 billion business. Healthcare is a $1 billion business.
Yeah.
Literally.
Oh yes. So to find ways to get this a little better, there have been attempts like in Iran. If you donate an organ, you get first of all you can pay someone to donate an organ in Iran, and the government will actually give you, I think, thousands of dollars to donate an organ. And as a result, they have a very short wait list compared to the U.S. The U.S. has a very, very long wait list because politicians are very adamant you cannot buy or sell organs.
Right.
It's very, because in reality, to be fair, it's easy to abuse that. There are people who are selling.
I'll give an example. Saudi Arabia. I found out one of the reasons why Saudi Arabia has such a tight-knit relationship with China is because it's a known fact that China is very highly involved in the black market organ harvesting and organ donating industry, the black market industry. I was reading it online that there's been a lot of rich Saudis that have purchased organs like through the black market. And Allah knows best, it's very probable that they've gotten it from dead Muslim Uyghurs in these concentration camps.
Yes. And that actually is quite scary because you're right. China has been accused of, and they admit to harvesting organs from criminals.
Right.
And criminals with a quotation around it. So they've been accused of taking
and according to
from,
them,
yeah.
realistically, those Muslims and other people, other undesirables in these concentration camps are classified as criminals.
Definitely.
So
And-
that would apply to them as well.
And there
even in
have
terms
been
of like the
articles,
bodies
yeah.
museums.
Yeah.
Remember the body museum that came to New York?
Yes.
Huge scrutiny because
Yes.
these were real bodies of real people.
Yeah. And did they consent to it? Probably not.
Obviously not. But the whole thing is that the Chinese government was saying that these people were criminals.
Oh yeah. A month or two ago, there was a big article about how a bunch of Uyghur prisoners came forward to say that they had their organs harvested without their permission. Some of them while they were awake, which is scary as all heck.
Yeah.
It's a frightening thought.
But it unfortunately it's reality. It's very much reality.
So this is the problem, because on one hand, if we pay people to voluntarily do it, then you're going to have, a couple of years ago, there was a case where a funeral home was taking organs without telling people, the families, and they were selling them.
Yeah.
And so you don't want that to happen.
As a matter of fact, there was something on the news where a person had died, and for some reason their body was exhumed, and they found newspaper in the cavity of the person's body.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Things
where was
like this.
that?
This was some years back, but it's fairly recent. Yeah, but things like this happen all the time.
I remember that was a big story in the news.
Yeah.
They wanted prison time for those people.
Yeah.
Because the thought of your loved one having to go through this scares any person.
Yeah.
This is why it's a pretty emotional issue for a lot of people.
As a matter of fact, there was a guy, I think he was either in Illinois.
Yeah.
I think it was Illinois. He got convicted of running a organ harvesting ring.
Yeah.
He only got 9 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
There was, you're right. There actually was another organ harvesting ring in New Jersey, big one,
Yeah.
where they would. This guy was an organ broker. He was surprisingly enough, he was this Israeli guy who was setting it up where I can get, if you need an organ. Now the doctors will prioritize organs from a relative, meaning like, I want to donate my kidney. I could donate to a stranger person on the wait list, or I could say my cousin needs it. I'll donate specifically to him.
Right.
So he was paying
Because
people.
if you're a relative, the probability of it being rejected is very slim.
Yes.
Especially, obviously, if you have the same blood type, those type of things.
And you wouldn't donate unless there was a relative. These people, it's not like they're going to go somewhere else.
Right.
So this guy was hiring people from, I think, like the Philippines or somewhere to say, oh, he's my cousin from overseas. Can you donate his kidney? And he was paying them under the table.
Wow.
And it was a large ring. This was a gigantic story in the news because I think I'm not sure if they ever got convicted or if I lost track of the story, but it was big because they were paying people to claim to be long lost relatives to donate organs.
Right. In all reality, it was a scam.
It was a scam. They didn't know each other, and this guy was just making a lot of money off of it.
Yeah. That's
So
serious.
it's a tough situation.
Very tough.
If you make it volunteer only, we're gonna have a shortage. People will die.
Right.
If you make it pay only, you're gonna have a lot of abuses and coercion. If should we allow them to be sold and just negotiate prices? Well, then the poor people who are poor can't
Obviously,
afford it.
Exactly. Right.
And so now
Then you'll literally have people robbing and killing people to try to get the bag to try to get try to get an organ donation. You know what I'm saying? It's a whole slew of problems.
Yeah.
Whole slew of problems.
So there are some very secular people who are saying, let's just have an opt-out system where everyone gets automatically added to the list and you have to say specifically no. But
that's a problem.
that's a problem.
That's
I
a
agree.
problem.
I
Yeah.
agree. Most Islamically, that's a non-starter.
That's non-debatable that's not acceptable Islamically. Yeah, that's just
So there, just to go back to the point we talked about last time, there's different schools of thought in medicine.
Right.
Islamic schools of thought, you have the Islamic schools of thought. Medical schools of thought are a couple different things. There's one called Kant deontology, where if taking without permission is always wrong, then there's no excuse. That's the
Right.
first one, and that's
Right.
like the most idealistic.
That's
way
like
of
the
it.
most conservative view.
Yeah, there's no excuse. Doesn't matter if you save lives or not, you cannot.
Right.
Second one, utilitarianism is okay. Saves the most lives? Most lives. Okay, everything else is second place. So if I have to rob organs from other people or take them without their permission, tough. I just saved more than one life. Because one person, if you donate your organs, one person can donate multiple organs to different people. You can donate your heart to one person, your kidneys to someone else.
Right.
Your lungs to another person, and one person can save multiple lives.
Right.
So if your car, that's why if you go to the DMV, they say, please add yourself to the transplant list, please, because you could save 5 lives.
Right.
And so there's a lot of, I guess bioethically, I guess they always say, well, please make it voluntary. So if we
Right.
can encourage you to do it by yourself,
Right.
this solves the whole problem.
Right. But going back, pertaining to the
Yeah.
the Islamic lens, is that we believe as Muslims is that life and death are by default in the hands of Allah at all times anyway.
Yeah.
So obviously there's known cases of people receiving transplants and they still end up dying.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Or people who go under the knife to donate and they end up dying.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So these are realities.
It's not risk-free.
It's not risk-free at all.
People who do donate organs
and then
do die.
also there's probabilities that even if it's a perfect match, same blood type, everything, that the body can still reject it.
Oh, yes.
And I know people personally, they've gotten organ transplant, and they have to take medications for the rest of their lives to make sure that the body doesn't reject the organ.
Yes. So, well, there's the thing, because like you said, these things don't always work. Some people need like a second transplant because the first one didn't take.
Yeah.
And now there's a question, well, can this person, do you want to try again? They might reject it again. Or someone else who's not had an organ before.
Right.
Who do you prioritize?
Exactly. Right. All of those things come into play.
They all come into play, which is why a committee has to say, look, there's no right answer. There's no rule book on these things. We make some simple guidelines, but they're not firm.
In other words, you have to
rules.
make them permeable on purpose.
Yes.
Right.
And there's also now there's a nationwide registry of organs for a lot of stuff. However, people try to abuse that system all the time.
No, and again, going back to what I mentioned, that's why people mistrust that national registry so much, because there have been confirmed cases of people dying under very shady circumstances who ironically were on those national registry lists.
Yes. So they're trying to make it a state by state registry, but there's a limit because you're going to.
But even with the state by state, the same
things happen.
Same things would happen.
It's hard to so one of the problems is you have to be somewhat nearby to get a transplant. Like if a heart becomes available right now, then you have a couple of hours to put it on ice, put it in a cooler, and send it to whatever hospital, and they can do a transplant right now.
Right.
But it's got to be now.
Right.
And so one of the guidelines for that is because so you have to be on the list, you have to be some priority, you have to basically be by the phone or have a pager or something.
Right.
Because if you're getting one, you're coming and getting one tonight.
Right.
There's no wait on this.
Right.
And so you have to be near a hospital, you have to be on call, you have to have everything all ready to go. People have tried to game the system. I think the most famous one I can think of recently is Steve Jobs. He had a kind of pancreatic cancer. And it was actually curable, but for many of the reasons, he was a bit of a hippie. He didn't want to take medication, and it metastasized. It spread to his liver.
Wow.
So he needed a liver transplant. The thing is, so one of the things, unfortunately, is if you're a celebrity, they will sort of move you up the list a little bit.
Obviously.
Like if a politician gets cancer, should he be higher up on the list than someone who's not? That's a hard question.
Right. And Islamically, that falls under the category of al-asabiyya, xenophobia, via nepotism.
Yeah.
So you're literally favoring someone based on their status in society, which is Islamically that's wrong.
It's very wrong, but you're right. You said before, it is the reality. And remember, was it Mickey Mantle? He had a bar named after him because of how much he drank.
Wow.
He had liver failure, needed a transplant. If you're an alcohol abuser, you're not gonna get a transplant. But he was Mickey Mantle, a national hero, big time celebrity. They managed to convince the ethics board that he is, his life has a lot of public value, and that he helps, the world in some way. And they gave him a transplant above other people.
Wow.
Not a great situation. The way Steve Jobs was, he needed a transplant. But for livers, because of such short supply, there's a transplant for every state.
Right.
So he lives in California. So he put himself on the transplant list for every state. And they know people try to do this. And they say, you can't do that.
Well, obviously, he had the money to try to push that.
He's a billionaire.
Right.
You could buy a house in each state and say that's your address.
Right.
So what he did was he tried doing that. And they said, look, we know people tried doing this. You have to actually be within 6 hours of the hospital to get a transplant. So he's got a private jet.
Right.
So he got a transplant in Georgia. They told him, one's available. He hopped on the plane and flew right over and got it. People were really angry about this.
But look what happened. Allah still took his life anyway. Because life and death are in the hands of Allah. So it doesn't matter what you do. If Allah decides that you are going to go, you got to go. So
right.
That type of thing. So
let me ask you a couple of questions, because I do get questions from non-Muslims all the time.
Right.
And the big one is, so you people can't eat pork. You know where this is going.
You people, yeah.
But if you needed like a pig heart, what would you do?
The general ruling pertaining to anything that's Islamically mahrum, that's Islamically prohibited to consume dietarily, it's exclusively pertaining to a dietary context. Like, for example, if I have a coat that's made from pigskin, that's not mahrum. That's not Islamically prohibited to don, to wear. Right? Because Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, the skin of any animal is purified once it's tanned.
Oh. Okay.
So the skin of any animal, once it's tanned, once it's processed, it becomes mahlul, to wear. Not to eat, but to wear. It becomes Islamically allowable to wear. So likewise, if you are able to receive a transplant from a non-human or an animal source, it doesn't matter whether that animal is mahrum, Islamically prohibited to eat. It still is mahlul, Islamically allowable to use for another purpose that's non-dietary. The proof for that is what Allah says in chapter 2 in Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow. Allah says, describing himself, Allah says, it is he who has created all of what is in the earth for you.
I see.
So we have the choice to either use things for an Islamically allowable purpose or for an Islamically prohibited purpose. So in this case, in terms of animal sources for transplants, there's no Islamic restriction or prohibition.
I see. Okay. That makes a lot of sense then. Sort of a side topic, Jehovah's Witnesses, they're famous because they refuse blood transfusions.
They refuse anatomical reception, period.
Period.
No bone marrow, no blood, no skin graft, nothing.
I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
Yeah. So Islamically is different. With the organ donation thing, based on the position that I mentioned, it's what it is. Now, also, let's say, for example, bone marrow, blood, skin graft, those rulings are a lot more permeable, a lot looser. You'll still have people that cling to those classic positions that I mentioned before.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So, and that's why I took the position that you can donate something which doesn't require or doesn't necessitate your death. And that's why I'm a blood donor. I've been a blood donor since 2007.
Good on you.
And the reason why I decided to be a blood donor is because of the verse in the Quran where Allah says in chapter 5, verse 32, Surah Al-Ma'idah, the chapter of the Grail, Allah says, and as a result of that which was imposed upon the children of Israel, whoever kills someone who has neither killed someone nor has caused corruption within the earth, it's just as though they've killed all of humanity. However, whoever saves them, it's just as though they've saved all of humanity. And one of the things that I learned through my research of being a blood donor through blood donation is that every single blood donation, you have the potential to save up to 3 lives.
Oh, yes.
So those are the reasons why I'm a blood donor.
That is true. I actually wanted to come back to the blood thing because, a car accident victim is going to need up to 100 pints of blood. If you're in the ICU for a long time, sickle cell patients, they need blood throughout their lives.
Yeah, definitely.
People of cancer.
Hemophiliacs.
Yeah. Everyone needs blood. And hospitals run through a lot of blood.
Every day. All the time. And that's why blood banks are always functioning, like almost every day.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, more than every day. On a typical day in the hospital, I'm giving blood to different people.
Yeah.
Because it's
like
necessary.
Literally every hospital, regardless of how small or how large, they have a blood bank.
Oh, yes.
Every hospital. It's mandatory to have a blood bank.
Yeah. And it's in a warming room. They can just give it to you right now because if someone's in the ER right this second, they have it in like a not a fridge but a warm heating pack. They can just take it out and put it right there now because they need it.
Especially for my blood type. I'm of the O group.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm O positive. But here's the funny thing about the difference between O negative and O positive. O negative, you can donate to anyone, regardless of the integer, the positive or negative on your blood type.
Right.
Since I'm O positive, I can only donate to blood types that are positive.
Right.
Like AB positive, A positive, B positive, what have you.
Yeah.
But this is why generally the O group is the universal blood donor.
It is.
And that's why when you're in the hospital and you need blood and they don't know your blood type, they'll automatically just pump you with O negative.
Yeah.
Because it's very unlikely that your body will reject O negative blood. If your body rejects O negative blood, that's not a good look for you.
Right.
Even though it's not impossible for that to happen. As a matter of fact, I remember during Hurricane Sandy, they had the police presence at Hurricane Sandy. And this is the first time in my life that I actually saw police with their blood type on their vest.
Wow.
Yeah, they actually have their blood types on their vest. So in the event they get shot, they get rushed to hospitals, they know exactly what their blood type is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
type O blood is the most needed, most requested blood for
It's
hospitals.
actually the most popular blood type humanly. About 45% of the human race is of the O group.
Oh wow.
Because of that, because of the fact that they're the universal blood donor.
Yes.
The universal blood receiver is AB.
Yes.
The AB group.
They can take anything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back. This was something I learned.
But with O,
Yeah.
O can only receive blood from O.
Right.
And AB can only give blood to someone who's AB.
Correct.
Right.
I have a relative who's AB, and they call him all the time, like, can you donate this month? Because they need AB blood.
Right.
It's a very specific kind.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So yeah, it's I remember. Well, we're going on this
And
topic.
bone marrow also functions the same way.
Bone
Bone
marrow,
marrow, not skin grafting necessarily, because I don't know the standards of how skin. I don't know whether skin grafting is based on blood type. I'm not sure, but I know for a fact bone marrow, blood, obviously, and organ donating are all based on blood type.
The closer the match, the better.
Right.
Including with organs. Blood type matching organs is also really important because it's hard to flush the blood out of an organ. You really want the best match you can.
Right. Exactly, and it decreases the probability of the body rejecting the organ.
Yeah. So, pretty much, it's something that everyone needs. Marrow transplants are really important. Everyone should get put yourself on the registry. They give like a Q-tip test or something just to get your DNA so you can figure out your marrow type.
Right.
It used to be they would actually take a long needle into your bone and take your marrow out.
From what I've heard, that is painful as hell. From what I've heard,
it is.
I'm a bone marrow donor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm registered as a bone marrow donor. I've never donated bone marrow before.
So
I've never done it before.
I never have either. It used to be that they would actually try to numb you and then put a long needle into your bone, which
Right.
no one likes the thought of,
Right.
unless you really have to. I have some relatives did it the old-fashioned way,
Right.
and it wasn't very good.
Right.
As I understand it now, they're a little better. I've been told they have a new way of like a blood transfusion. If you like donate your plasma or your platelets,
Right.
They take it out, they centrifuge it, and put it back in. So just take out some marrow.
Right.
It's a little more complicated. They give you some medications to help your marrow leak out.
Right.
It's not the easiest situation.
Because that's literally the house of your blood cells. That's literally where your blood cells are formed, your marrow. Yeah.
Yeah, and these are the patients who need it the most, like cancer patients.
Right.
Like if you have some sort of like
Like
childhood cancer,
leukemia, things like that.
leukemia, those they need marrow.
Yeah.
It's-
What about people who have lupus?
Lupus is a tough one. Lupus tends to affect different organs all over the place. That's one of the definitions.
Do they affect bone marrow as well?
Not as often. Usually it's the kidneys.
Oh, okay.
Kidneys are the most transplanted because of diabetes and lupus.
Okay.
Other organs get affected too, though. Liver can be affected by lupus.
Right.
Skin, everything. It can affect any part of the body,
Right.
really. Marrow is not as common, though, although it's not impossible.
It's not to be ruled out, basically.
Not to be ruled out.
Right.
Lupus is a tough one.
Yeah.
So
But I actually know people personally who have lupus.
okay,
Yeah, and
you
they
do,
they struggle. Yeah,
It's tough.
It's tough for them.
It's a
I know
long-term
people who have
disease.
sickle cell anemia as well, and it's very tough for them.
These are long-term diseases.
They're lifelong.
Sickle cell should be a whole episode by itself because that's something we go from the beginning about, like sickle cell.
Right.
Because it crosses over with everything. Can you trust someone to give pain medication? Can you give them organs?
Right.
Can you? There's a social difference in aspect of who gets treated and who doesn't get painkillers or not.
Right.
Many things with sickle cell. That's a future episode we should talk about. I've always actually, when I was as a student, we actually had an episode. There was a case where a patient refused a donation kidney stone, refused an organ donation because they said that the Nation of Islam
They refused to receive an organ
to
donation.
receive an organ.
Really?
This was they said they were a Nation of Islam family and that they were refusing organs, and this had to go to the ethics committee because what do you do? This was actually they were a minor. So then
wow.
it became like an ethics committee question because, well, who makes that decision? If the parents say no, you can get a court order, but that's complicated, and then like whose interest is it in?
Right.
It was a tough one. I never actually heard a Muslim say no to an organ before.
You trust me, you'll have Muslims who would refuse it.
Yeah.
Literally because of the varied opinions that I mentioned.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if you have 1.8 billion people, you're going to see difference of opinion.
Obviously. Right.
Amazing. I think we pretty much covered most of the stuff.
Yeah,
here.
we covered a lot of good stuff, man. Yeah.
So, a quick ask the audience. We had a little bit of a poll going on here.
Let's check the poll. Let's see.
Let's see. First one: would you anatomically donate? a lot of people watching right now, so we're going to leave this poll open for later. So people who are watching after the video can still
definitely
donate.
keep the polls open.
Yeah.
What about the other questions? Do you
So the
know
other-
whether or not anyone
so yeah.
voted on them?
So, not quite yet. The idea is first, would you donate? Yes or no? I'm going to move to the next question in
Right.
a second. Now here, other questions: have you ever anatomically donated, or would you?
Right.
And looks like the last question actually got deleted, but you guys should put in the comments section. Have you ever donated or received anything anatomically, including blood?
Right.
That's wondering. We'll try talking about this more at the next episode. I think at our follow up.
Wait, is it possible to add a question right now while we're doing the live, or is it too late because it's locked in?
You could try asking it now if you can type.
Yeah. One of the things I was asking about is wait. You know what happened? I think they only allow you to ask 2 questions at a time. That's probably why they got deleted.
That's probably what happened.
That's probably what happened.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's probably what happened.
So yeah, but the voting will still have to open after our live stream is over, so you can
Yeah.
always answer it later and see how
Yeah,
the
and
results are.
definitely give feedback. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I mean, these are very important questions pertaining to would you anatomically donate or have you ever anatomically donated? And like I said, I myself, I've never donated an organ, but I donate blood all the time, and I see the value in donating blood, even to the extent where I've literally gotten emails from people thanking me for my blood donation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like from different blood banks and the New York Blood Center.
Yes.
American Red Cross. But I almost exclusively donate to New York Blood Center.
They're really good. They're a good organization.
Very good organization.
They always need blood.
Always.
They have blood banks in the area. They were trying to find ways to encourage more donation. Like it used to be, they actually pay you. They would actually give you money if you donated blood. The problem was a lot of people who should not be donating blood, who had HIV and stuff like that, were donating.
Oh,
and
man.
They had to stop because people were infecting the blood supply.
As a matter of fact, even till this day, when you donate blood, the questionnaire, they ask you, since 1977 to the present, have you ever had sex with a man even once?
That question is still there, yeah.
That question is still there. They on the paper questionnaire, they used to have 3 options.
Right.
Yes, no, or I'm female. If you're a male and you check yes, you're lifelong blacklisted.
Yes.
From the blood donation registry.
Yeah.
The LGBTQ actually tried to get that reversed.
Yes, they did. But actually, I don't know if it went to court or not. But the idea is,
I think it did go to court, but it either went to court and got dismissed, or it didn't make it to court.
So the blood bank system, it's quasi-private and quasi-public, but their
like
whole
half and
position
half.
is we have to be better safe than sorry. We really because in the 80s, tens of thousands of people who had hemophilia got infected with HIV. Half people hemophiliacs.
The most famous case of someone who received HIV through a blood transfusion was Arthur Ashe.
Arthur Ashe.
And he was like, at that time, he was like the Michael Jordan of tennis.
Yeah.
And it got so bad, it was actually rumored that he was homosexual, but ended up finding out. The truth came out that he wasn't homosexual. He received HIV-infected blood through a blood transfusion.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow.
And back in those days, before the sophistication of the medication, people who had HIV, they were literally dropping like flies.
It was really bad at the peak.
Yeah.
So now they don't pay for blood anymore.
Right.
But they'll try to do other things. So you want free movie tickets? You'll do that.
I got 2 movie tickets in the crib.
They're not paying you for blood.
I mean, obviously, I don't do it for the incentives of that. I do it because I know that this is something that is very noteworthy in the eyes of Allah in terms of helping or contributing to saving a person's life. So I want the reward for the hereafter.
It's a kind of a sadaqah.
I don't really give a damn about the consolations and the mundane. I care about the reward in the hereafter.
Sure.
But the consolations are cool. Free. I mean, who doesn't want free movie tickets? But I don't do it for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that whole thing about in the 80s, that's a really serious thing, because even now we know that homosexual men are the most vulnerable demographic in terms of the acquisition and proliferation of HIV.
They're still a vulnerable community.
Yeah, still vulnerable.
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
So that's a whole big issue. We're going to talk about that in a future episode, I think.
Yeah, definitely a future episode.
But yeah, everyone, please donate blood. If you donate, I think 8 times or more, they put you in the Gallon Club.
Yeah, I'm in the Gallon Club.
You're in the Gallon Club.
Yeah, I'm in the Gallon Club, yeah.
Nice. But I believe donating blood is a sadaqah, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, myself personally, I've actually donated blood on the behalf of Muslims who are dead.
Oh, wow.
So that's a form of a sadaqah jariyah, a continuous charity for them.
Wow.
So
I wasn't aware of
I've
that.
done that before. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. So
Cool.
it's just donating, period, just holistically, aside from the religio legal opinions. It is something that's noteworthy, and it is something that you should hope that Allah will reward you for. It's just that you have to remember, as a Muslim, being Muslim first, we have to do everything within the parameters of revelation.
Right.
We just have to. Because if
Sure.
you don't, in spite of it being a noteworthy action, if you don't do it within the parameters of revelation, it won't get accepted as a positive action.
I see.
So what's the point of doing a positive action if it's not Islamically accepted?
Sure.
You know, so
Okay.
along those lines.
Allah knows best. Well, that about does it for today's episode. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so please interact with us. Please answer the question. We welcome the feedback. Any criticism, comments, corrections, feedback, we welcome it. So we hope you enjoyed this live. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we definitely plan on keeping this going. And thank you for joining us on Sharia's Anatomy. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you, James.
All right, so I'm James. If you have any questions or comments about today's episode, please contact us by our Facebook page or tweet at us with questions or comments. My Twitter is at SULAYMANF, like in Frank.
Yeah.
And Garrett's Twitter is?
My Twitter is the same as my Instagram, the Muslim Model. So you can contact us there.
Okay. Help the listeners discover the show by leaving us a like on Facebook or a message about us, or tell someone about
Yeah,
us.
sharing it. Yeah, if you like what you heard, please share us.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.